Dobar dan, dobrodošli na 13. izdanje festivala Stih u regiji. Hvala svima iz inozemstva, našim gostima dragim koji su stigli, hvala ostaloj publici. Krećemo danas u 12 sati. Prvi program je razgovor i čitanje poezije našeg dragog gosta iz Velike Britanije, Jamesa Byrna. S njim će razgovarati naš suorganizator, pjesnik, antologičar i tako dalje, prevoditelj Damir Šodan. Još ću samo nekoliko uvodnih napomena, nakon toga program nastavljamo u 18 sati u Knjižnici Bogdana Ogrizovića. Imamo jedno predstavljanje naše nove knjige iz Biblioteke poezije Branislava Glupca. Nakon toga do 19:30 je razgovor i čitanje poezije s našim ukrajinskim gošćama i u 9 sati 21 sat je u kafeu Crni mačak čitanje i koncert Denisa Katanaca. Eto, prepuštam riječ Damiru i Jamesu. Dečki, izvolite. Odnosno, Tomica u ime P.E.N centra. Izvolite, Tomica.
Evo, ispred Hrvatskog P.E.N centra samo ukratko, hvala što ste došli. Ovo je naša najdraža knjižnica koju vodi Maja i njene kolegice i kolege. I tako, to je jedna pjesnička knjižnica i zbog toga najviše volimo da ove pjesničke susjede tu. Sudjelujemo sa velikom radošću u programu SUR-a, stiha u regiji, i koji vodi urednik poezije Ivana Herceg, jer tu je najbolje mjesto da se predstavi poezija, ali suvremena poezija. I tako, eto, regija poezija je svijet, koliko god svijet poezije bio mali, na festivalima se on vidi koliko je jak. I isto tako je postoji jedan jezik poezije koji je zapravo univerzalan jezik. So that's, I would like to welcome our guest, who is also came from P.E.N, along with the Ukrainian poets, James Byrne, one of the most interesting poets in Britain. We have collaboration with him and Stephen and the European Poetry Festival for a long time. And as we said, when we say a verse in region, it means like the poetry is a world for itself, and then the language of poetry is a language that is universal. So, and events like this, festivals, it comes out at the best, and that's why we cherish these moments of friendship and poetry. So, thank you all for coming.
Okay, let me take over. James, welcome back to Croatia.
Thanks, it's great to be back here. I was here, I think we were talking about
almost the university.
10 years ago?
9 or 10 years ago.
I was a young man. It's great to be back. And I've never been to this library, it's beautiful here. So thanks, Maya, for inviting me. And thanks to P.E.N and to Nietzsche and yourself, two great Croatian poets. I'm very pleased to be here, thanks. And thanks to the festival. I think I can see you there. Thank you so much.
SUR, yeah, that means stih u regiji, verse in the region.
Nice.
I wanted to say, before we start, we're going to do this mostly in English. Is everybody okay with that? Because we have international guests. Yeah. So I'm going to do a little summations in Croatian, na hrvatskom, da se čisto, because we're home, jesmo kući, because we're home. Okay.
So for me.
Yeah, okay. I want to say, like, I want to start with an anecdote. Like 10 years ago or so, we were in London. We had a reading with British poets, with you, Stephen Fowler, and everything. And I brought to this reading a T-shirt where I printed the cover page of then recent issue of Poesia magazine, and I handed it over to James. And then right there at the bar, you know, he took off his. We ordered whiskey, and he took off his T-shirt and put on the Poesia T-shirt. And that stuck with me. I said, look, this is the coolest thing that everybody ever did for Croatian poetry. You know? We have these collaborations, international, but somebody takes off his shirt and put on our shirt, And believe me, on that note, we started, and it was a great evening. The readings were superb, and the after party was great. And I don't even remember. I don't know. There were like 6 or 7 of us in a single car driving around London, and somebody had to duck because of the police. You know? So it was really a great night.
I still have the shirt. I'm not going to take this off and put it on now.
I didn't think anything. Yeah.
But I bought it to Croatia, so if you come to the festival tomorrow night, I might be reading with the shirt.
With the poesy shirt. How cool, you see?
Okay.
It still fits.
Unbelievable.
Still fits, just.
James, just to give a little bit of a background, James was educated in New York. He's known as an international poet. You were an editor in, I hope you still are, in the art publications. And also, for years, he was the leading man behind the Wolf Poetry magazine, which was read not only in UK but across Europe. We published there a feature on Croatian poetry, actually a sizable one. And our actually friendship goes back to 2012 when there was a big festival in London, because there was Olympics, and then Nicola Magiro introduced us. I think it was a big hoo-ha, like over 200 poets, I think, or something like that.
It was when the Olympics came to London,
Yeah.
so the idea was one poet from every Olympic competing country. And I remember being part of the festival selection process, and just a lot of people saying, who is the poet from Ghana these days? And it was, I can't believe they organized this festival. But it happened. It was the biggest poetry event since Allen Ginsberg read at the Royal Albert Hall.
Somebody told me that.
So,
there and then,
you know, for 50 years it was the biggest event in poetry. But yeah, one of the great things about that festival was meeting you.
Okay, thank you. But you know, this whole story about festival, you know, goes on because there was a poet missing from Monte Carlo, you know. And then Simon Armitage was going around, he was actually pissed off. He said, how come they cannot find anybody down there? He said, I guess they're too busy driving around in their Lamborghinis to care about poetry, you know. So later, 10 years later, I published, I used the same principle, like one poet out of each country, and I put together an anthology of European poetry called Are There Any Poets in Monte Carlo? So go back to this thing, you know. But there were poets from different regions and everything, and Tomica, we published it in Croatian, and Croatian P.E.N, and it's available everywhere in libraries because the Ministry of Culture bought off, so I don't have a single copy anymore. So it was a good move, going all the way back to Parnassus Festival. I wanted to talk about, first about the books. You published, like, James published a number of books. Recently, your book came out in Argentina, right? And also he was an editor, very important guy who put together an amazing anthology. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, but his own books include, among other, Blood Sugar, Krv Šećer, 2009, Myths of Savage Tribe, Mitovi o divljem plemenu, 2014, in collaboration with Sandy Parmar, White Coins, Bijele kovanice, 2015, Everything Broken Up Dance, Sve slomljeno pleše, 2015, and the very interesting recent one, Places You Leave, mjesta iz kojih odlaziš. And as I said earlier, he worked on an anthology, very, very interesting one, with Kokotet, the anthology of the contemporary Burmese poetry. So first, can we have a word on that? How did that collaboration came about? Because you're very interested in what's going on around the world in poetry, but this was like, for me, it will be like an odd choice. Because we don't know anything about Burma, at least in my case.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I used to publish The Wolf. I published it for 15 years, and every time we would have a feature from each country. So once it was Croatia, we published poets from Ukraine, long time before people were talking about Ukraine. And we're starting to think outside of Europe, and I was going to publish a feature of poetry from Pakistan. It didn't quite happen for one reason or another, and then somebody said, what about Myanmar?
Myanmar, yeah. The former Burma.
So yes, Myanmar, you know, is next to Thailand, India. It's a country that has had a dictator after a dictator after a dictator. And what happened in London at the time, there was a poet that had been in prison, and we were organizing a protest at the Myanmar embassy. Now, just to briefly explain, his name is SUR-u, more of a performer poet. And what happened is he wrote a 14-line poem, which was an acrostic. You know?
Acrostic, yeah.
Yeah.
Acrostic.
And the poem was like a romantic poem, simple poem really. But acrostically it said, General Fan Shui is a, you know, something like that, okay? And so he got imprisoned for 14 years, 14 lines one, 14 years. And so we organized a protest on Valentine's Day, the 14th, and we would put Valentine's Day cards through the Myanmar embassy. And, you know, hundreds of people sending these Valentine's Day cards for So Wei. And then after that, I thought, why don't we find out more about Myanmar poetry? And the more I found out, the more interesting the poetry was. Quite innovative poetry, because they had so many decades of censorship. Like, if you can imagine, you can't use the word red because of political associations. You can't use the word mother because Aung San Suu Kyi is the mother. So everything they write, the censorship, you know, they would cut out lines. And I'll give you one crazy example. One of the dictators, General Ni Win, from 1968, his name translates Ni Win, sunrise. So he banned sunset because he thought you might be trying to kill him in your poems, like trying to assassinate him. So, you know, it's crazy, but one of the reasons that the poetry became very innovative is to avoid the censorship. So, you know, a poem that might seem like a romantic poem, acrostically, that one did not avoid censorship, of course, he went to prison. But all the poets are trying to make things a little strange in order to actually communicate. And that, for me, was really interesting. So we published an anthology after that of 15 poets, really from 1960s.
Yeah, it's an amazing book. I have it. I got it there at the festival. And one thing I just remember, the digression, actually it's on the point. Zayar Lin, the poet from Burma, from Myanmar, he was telling me, we got into conversation, and he was telling me that he had translated through English Thomas Shalom into Burmese. And the younger generation of writers were like completely mad about Shalom, and they started changing their own style because of Zayar's translations of Shalom. And that gave me a great hope in truth, because I do a lot of translations. The translation is actually doable. If you can carry that energy, you know, the power of language, and be as innovative as Shalom was in Slovenian, in your own language, you know, then you can really achieve something. And he told me that people were joking, I still remember this line, he said, it seemed like all of a sudden the Myanmar poetry jumped from the heart into the brain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Became less formulaic and kind of romantic and more like contemporary, postmodernist, if you want, you know, in a way.
And then it changed again. It was...
there was a change again, back to the old...
Yeah, in the 80s and 90s. So it was, you know, Charles Olson, I don't know if you know Charles Olson in projected verse. He talks about these four things, right? So how do you use the ear to the breath, to the heart? You know, and then, you know, what is the poem after this? So
projective verse, yeah.
Yeah, and these poets were more thinking about the ear as much as the heart and the breath of the poem. So lots of poems that are quite innovative, but also playful. So what is the word in Croatian for ludic? Like a ludic?
Ludički, we say, that's derived from Latin.
Yeah. So
ludism,
yeah.
So what I noticed is in Myanmar poetry you had this ludic, playful way of avoiding censorship, but also what I would call maybe vatic, like almost a quite visionary quality to the poems at the same time. So these two things happening in the same poem. Maybe I can read something by Zelin. I put it on my phone.
Okay, if you want, because it will be very interesting to hear, to illustrate. I mean, what you.
You want to hear a poem? Okay. So Zelin used one of the most important words in Myanmar poetry, which is history. So, you know, when you use a word like history in Myanmar poetry, it's like using the word love or something. It's so important because, of course, their history was denied them. And so this poem starts off with a declaration of somebody who is already dead. Yeah. So if you're already dead, then what is your history? And it's quite at the end of the poem, it's quite a short poem, but he decides to show us that the fight for history is still with us. So let me read this for you. Okay. I don't usually read from my phone. I am a dinosaur, but let me read it. Zealin, my history is not my history. I am already dead. I can say this unreservedly. It wasn't me who wrote my history. 11 out of 10 people don't know me. Historians have no idea about my history written by historians. I have no souvenir whatsoever for sale. PhD scholars, journalists, they might have written my history, but I can't remember it. No stone inscription, no tomb, no bone, not even ash. I have not written my history. They have written it for me. Those academics, they have written their own versions. What they have written were mythologies sprinkled with gold dust. How many sprinkles do I amount to in there? I wasn't aware of the death pit. They have written even my own death. Amid deaths and deader deaths, I was almost death untitled, a crippled death. Even the death wasn't genuine. Even in death, I was exiled. They did not fully write my supporting documents. Even in death, I did not have a residence permit. They have written my death. They have written my death in the air. They have written my death in the water. I read it again, my own history. Missed spellings, missed grammar. I don't even know how to pronounce the word, vocabulary. They have written my history. They have airbrushed me from history. My history has just begun. I'm going to write my own history. This is Zealin. A really extraordinary book.
I just want to say, Zealin also collaborated with you on this anthology also.
He wrote the introduction.
He wrote the introduction, I remember, yeah. Funny thing, one more anecdote about Zealin. We were walking around the center, the South Bank Center in London, and Zealin asked me, Damir, this is such a huge event here, so many people from the Western countries, everything. Is anybody going to tell us what happened to postmodernism? I said, man, don't ask that question out loud. We just don't talk about it anymore. It just died on its own. I didn't know what to tell you. Know what I mean?
Yeah, I think in England is probably the wrong question to ask. I don't know if the English can help, but the English might not know.
Okay, that train is gone. Let me put it like this. Anyways, the title of this anthology was Bones Will Crow, Kostiće Graktati, and it was published in 2012 by ARC. But now, let's just detach ourselves a little bit from Burmese and work poetry and go back to you. How did you, it's a very general question, but I cannot escape it. How did you discover poetry? Was it a discovery process? Was it, I don't know. How were you engaged with the whole business of poetry?
Yeah. Well, you're a music man. Has anyone heard Damir play? You can go to the festival and watch him play, right?
Thank you.
So I love music. I believe like Nietzsche, when Nietzsche said, life without music would be a mistake. So for me, music is so important, and so my father, I didn't grow up with my father, but he plays about 8 instruments, and so I always wanted to try and make music out of language. But of course with that comes responsibility as well. You can't just, or maybe you can, but it depends on what you're writing, of course. For me, I'm a poet activist as well, so it's really important for me to consider a kind of ethics of my poetry. People talk about poetics.
Poetics. That's very good.
And so, so there's another story which I was smoking at school, and a teacher caught me smoking and said, "You're in trouble, you're detained." What do you call it here, like after school detention? So we
don't do that here. I'm joking.
Thank you.
No. Yeah. I can't remember the word. Pritvor, školski pritvor. Ne postoji to. No, not really.
But
Kazan.
It's the only time I've been punished in my life and really enjoyed it. She gave me Allen Ginsberg to read. How I was 12 years old. Wow. Great, And then the second time she caught me smoking again. Of course, I want to get caught second time. She gave me Leonard Cohen, and then she gave me Sylvia Plath, and so
amazing.
So I just had a good teacher. Maybe some of you write, maybe you love reading,
So you discover poetry through transgression.
Yes.
But that's a great way to start. I mean,
Yeah.
it is about rebellion, if you want.
Yeah. So there's that and music, which are really important.
Okay, that's amazing. Even though you have stellar like education background and everything, I'm so glad. I'm hearing this for the first time. What I wanted to say, yeah, with poetry, there are maybe two ways you can approach it. One is, to get deeper into the self, and the other one is to reach out to the world. Try to see things, show things, show it to the others. Essentially, behind it, I think there is a need to share. Also, to be, if you want, politically involved, even on a very subtle level.
Yeah.
Which brings us now again back to the same geographical region, but your recent book, which is here, Places You Live. It's really, truly an amazing work because it's very much centered in the world geography. You're going practically to different places. Most of them are kind of places in history. They had a really rough time for a while and still have. What drew you to those places? Did you make a conscious, effort to go to certain areas, or it was more like a random, you being traveling and jotting it down, or you specifically focused on certain areas?
Yeah.
Because it's a global book. It is about suffering, it is about politics, it is about the individual, and it's really, and everything is done through beautiful working in the English language.
Yeah. Well, it sort of takes us back to what we were talking about earlier about Myanmar. So I worked in Myanmar with Myanmar poetry between 2009 and 2012, and then I started to work with the Rohingya refugees. If you know about the Rohingya, they are some of the most suffering people in the world, and they live in the largest refugee camp in the world. It's around 1 million people. It's in Cox's Bazar. So this book, as you suggest, Damir, it comes out of the notebook. I was traveling, the book starts in Cox's Bazar, the largest refugee camp in the world, and then it goes through 8 other places, parts of Europe, but also Latin America. But a friend of mine, a climate activist, said, she picked up this book, she said, "Are these love miles, James? Are you going on holiday?" And I said, no, poets don't take holidays. That's what Pablo Neruda said, poets don't take holidays. They're always thinking, I'm not on holiday, and so it was all for work. I'm lucky I get invited to Croatia this week, but other festivals I've been invited to. And so I try and think and work with the community. Like the first poem in the refugee camp is written including quotes from the young poets I was working with. So Places You Leave was written that way. It's very much out of the notebook. I keep an active notebook, I'm sure a lot of you do.
So a lot of stuff was written on the spot there.
Yeah, and actually that made the form easier. So sometimes it was stanzas, sometimes it's longer lines, sometimes it's more like a lyric essay, we call them. But yeah, certainly it's a book which considers what the self is and what is the other. Emmanuel Levinas, the philosopher, he believed that the self was the other, or the self is the other. But is it? Is it? And I think that's the question I wanted to ask. What is the relationship between the self and the other? And that's where the book came from. So yeah, I mean this book I wrote quite quickly, and I more and more, and this is something I've learned over time, is to trust my intuition. Let the music in. It's like when you have, and you know this, when you have like a palette. Think of yourself as an artist. You have a palette. Sometimes you can have a bit of image, statement, philosophy. Sometimes it's song, music. So how do you use this color arrangement in a poem? I had a responsibility in every place I was in, though, to think about it in an ethical way. So that was important.
The book is really very colorful, I mean it in a good way, because it stretches, it goes from Burma to Istanbul, to Mexico, to Argentina, back to Germany, to different places. So there's a whole world in this book. And very often through his poetic self, a lot of those local voices get filtered, in a very, very special, and I would say a very gentle way. So I would think what is behind this book is largely empathy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trying to feel for these people, not only for them, but trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Why is everybody, like Leonard Cohen said, why is everybody so wounded? You know? I think, I mean, that's maybe one of the main questions of our time. Would you mind just reading for our audience here just the first bit of Cox's Bazar, and then I'm going to read Cox's Bazar, and then I'm going to read the translation. Rohingya people, by the way, were so hurt by the Myanmar government to the point that there was, they're talking about actual genocide.
Yeah.
Between the years, I think, 2015, for a lot of the rest of the world, it slipped under the radar, you know, I think. But there's an indictment by the International Court of Justice, you know, for genocide for the Rohingya people who are actually Muslims living in Myanmar, who are persecuted.
Yeah.
And just one more thing, actually, Cox's Bazar is a city in Bangladesh. It's a tourist place, but also apparently the largest refugee camp in the world.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, it's.
When we look at the numbers, yeah.
That's right, and it's actually been a camp for a lot longer than people realize. Captain Hiram Cox is named after him. You know, so the British, you know, were responsible. He was a British American, and he wanted to create a choky. You know, what's that word in Croatian? Choky, like a prison. Yeah. Yeah, so he said he wanted to create a prison, basically, and that prison has existed now for 150 years or more. And what's interesting about Cox's Bazar? Yeah, absolutely, total genocide happened. Everyone had to leave their homes in Myanmar or die, you know, and no choice.
750,000 people we're talking about, I think.
Yeah. So these were some of the notes I wrote. Oh, thanks for translating it.
Yeah, I'm going to read the translation of the first bit.
How far shall I go? There?
Yeah, up to now.
Okay. Yeah, so this is in that kind of lyric essay, but it does include. So what I was doing in Cox's Bazar was creating a poetry workshop in the camp. Never been done before, but working with about 15 young poets, all of them really in their 20s. And we created a book of poetry out of this as well. I'll read a poem of that later, and maybe get you involved in working on a translation, we'll see. But yeah, this is Cox's Bazar, how the book opens. I'll read a bit of it to you now. Cox's Bazar. You plant the jackfruit's anonymous nubbled face and wait in the boiling sand for something to happen. A goat's eye flashes gold, a girl swings on the tube well for a cup of water. You plant peas to grow in the monsoon and put on your best shirt, yellow for optimism. What is missing about the blank page is denied, decimated, you would like to cohere. Inside an airless, windowless hut, you tried to rewrite Wallace Stevens' 10 ways of looking at a passport. But I've never seen a passport, how does it begin? Tooth marks in the line break. You want to put the art back into heart. When your brother ran towards the Tatmadaw, this is the Burmese military, when your brother ran towards the Tatmadaw, crying, Jesu, Jesu, you turned and ran. Jahash of air, jail, lock and key. But without art, it's just he, meaning brother, come here brother, but he isn't listening. Your mother bribes the army guard to write a letter and asks about the non-trial. Will the guard deliver? Hope's lottery. There is no policy on answering letters of the law. The page is a windbreak. To write is to petition. The eye severs you in the photograph, so we repose. Someone else must always be next to you. You cannot work alone. Cyclonic clangor of rain. Sword water in the naff. The helicopter pumps into Bangladeshi airspace and fires on anyone swimming away. The poem, bare as a pulse, a knife, siblings in graves. The poem, bare as a knife, a pulse.
Thank you, James. I just want to ask you one thing. There's one footnote here that I didn't find. Jahaj, what is that? What is the meaning of air?
Yeah, it's basically a kind of obscenity in Arabic.
Ah, okay, I left it in the original. Okay, it's a swear word. Okay, it's obscenity. Okay. This will be published, the translations will be published in Poezija magazine in November, in the forthcoming issue, because there are a lot of footnotes, so I figure maybe that's better for magazine.
Thanks.
Gospodar, posadiš korgavo anonimno lice kruhovca uz ključali pjesak i čekaš da se nešto dogodi. Iz kozijeg oka blješti zlato. Djevojčica pritišće pumpu da natoči čašu vode. Sadiš grašak da izraste pod monsunom i oblačiš najbolju košulju. Žuto stoji za optimizam. Ono što nedostaje na bijeloj stranici uskraćeno. Desetkovan, radovi se ponovno doveo na okup. U zagušljivoj kolibi bez prozora pokušavaš parafrazirati Stevensa. 10 načina promatranja putovnice. Nemam pasoš. Kako počinje? Trag zubiju u lomljenju stiha. U umjetnost želiš vratiti umijeće srca. Kad ti je brat potrčao prema Tadmandavu vičući jazu i jazu, okrenio se i pobjegao. Jahaj zraka, zatvor, ključ, bravo. Bez umijeća ostaje samo on, što će reći brat. Tvoja mati podmičuje stražara vojske da napiše pismo. Postoji li mogućnost izbjegavanja suđenja? S čim li će stražar izići? Nada je lutrija. Nema ustaljene procedure za odgovaranje na pisma zakona. Papir je staza među usjevima. Pisati znači moliti. Ja te isjeca iz fotografije pa zastajem. Netko drugi mora uvijek biti uz tebe. Ne možeš raditi sam. Ciklonski klepet kiše. Voden mač u nafu. Helikopter tutnji bangladešanskim zrakom i puca na sve one što se udaljavaju plivajući. Pjesma je gola kao nož, kao bilo. Braća i sestre su u grobovima. Shall we do now the translation exercise for our audiences? Maybe it's a good moment.
We can, yeah. Would anyone like?
Or if you want to add something else about the book. The book is, by the way, very colorful, literally, as I said before, because it also contains paintings and very, very nice additions.
Yeah, I put together some collages.
Geographically, also, they tie to the places where the texts are coming from. So
Yeah.
it's really something.
Yeah, I started painting more and more recently. Actually, it was quite strange. My brother passed away during COVID, and
Sorry to hear
thank
that.
you.
It's just not
And so after around the time of this book, and has anyone experienced grief? Well, for me as a poet, I couldn't think in language, but I could see shape and color. So actually, the collages were a good time to do this work. Yeah. So what you're getting is a poem from a Rohingya poet. A little bit of audience participation, maybe. There's no pressure, but we're going to talk maybe a bit about Rohingya poetry, you think?
Yeah. Go ahead. We want to know. This will be actually very educational in a way, because we seldom think about many places in this world, with their own history and their own suffering and everything.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. People now say the world is on fire, which, of course, really terrible things happening in Palestine, Ukraine, other places in the world. And so it's easy sometimes perhaps to forget that, there's a long existing genocide against the Rohingya, and it's happening again. It's happening in a different way this time. So in Arakan, which is where the Rohingya are from, they are forcing the Rohingya to be conscripted to fight really against the military or against the Arakan army. So they're fighting against their own people, and the decision is join the army or we will kill you. So that's what's happening now. When I met Margaret Atwood many years ago, she said that for every 1 year of peace in the world, there are over 200 years of war. But actually, I think the ratio could be higher than this. And of course, during our lifetimes, we've all grown up with wars, not just one, but wars plural all around the world. What's happening to the Rohingya is really, really awful. And I'm still working with the Rohingya poetry that I encountered 5 years ago. And I speak to Rohingya poets every week. And one of these poets is completely isolated. So you have a choice. right? If you're in the refugee camp, you stay there and you're trapped. Or you live outside, you change your name, and you hope nobody finds you, right? That's the choice. So he's decided on this second choice. He lives outside the camp, and I can tell you his poetry name, which is Ro Maruz, but I can't tell you much about him because he lives in hiding, and you know, we communicate every day. And I was saying to Maya that I don't even use his real name. I know his real name, but just to be safe, I don't use it. Yeah. I can tell you he's in his 20s, he's a young man. He lives, his parents are with him again now, but he lives generally isolated and has done for many years. So what we're going to do is maybe look at this poem, Night Blooming Jasmine, and I'll just read a couple of lines in Rohingya, maybe just the first line to give you a sense. And then, and I know you've translated a couple of poems into Rohingya, but we'll just try a few lines and see how we can maybe get a translation into Croatian.
Or, excuse me, in your respective languages, because you guys are from Macedonia, and try to come up with something. In Slovenia, you know?
Yeah, the more languages, the better.
The better.
Yeah. Okay, so O Sandamamu Hoto Funo Sai is the opening line. And just from this, hopefully you can hear there is a song. This is like a song, this poem. A lot of Rohingya poets are relying on the oral tradition. So their poetry is sung, you know, round the campfire, you know, with a guitar sometimes. And we did this in the camps. And what happened is in the camps, a lot of Rohingya poets are writing directly in English because they want to be heard. You know, they want their work to be heard, so they're writing in English first. Ro Maruz is different because he is trying to learn his culture again by learning his language again. Yeah, so it's very powerful what he's doing. This is a more traditional poem, a little bit easier to translate, I hope. But let's just read the English version, and later I might read one more of his poems to close. But this is called Night Blooming Jasmine. Oh moon uncle, please hear me. Come to me wearing white. For you the buds of the night blooming jasmine wait. The wind will blow, blow gently, the buds will fall. The whole yard will smell of its scent. Oh moon uncle, please hear me. Come to me wearing white. Bubu said she will place buds of the night blooming jasmine on her head, knitting the threads into a wreath. She will dye henna on her hands among friends. Her wedding is in 2 days. Will you come? Oh moon uncle, please hear me. Come to the wedding wearing white. So, I know you might like to read the translation of that in a little bit, but possibly we could just translate the first couple of lines in your languages together. So if you have, this is class time now, if you have a pen and paper, just write the first line, see if you can translate the first line, and then we'll talk about it.
So we can hear it in Macedonian.
Yeah, who is Macedonian in here? Okay, no pressure on you. I think I saw 3 of you there. But if we could have a Macedonian version of this poem by the end of the day, or the end of the festival, that would be great. And then we will also consider.
Otherwise, you're going to detention. When you're going to
Slovenia as well.
Yeah, and I'll give you some poetry to read in the detention. But yeah, so we're going to just try the first couple of lines here. And you know, this is a poem where you don't want to lose the song-like quality as much as you can. So you might keep that in mind, okay? Now, as you're doing that, maybe we can just have a little talk about Rohingya poetry as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about Ro Maruz, it's interesting being at this festival because Ro Maruz, his book comes out in October, but we can't have a launch. You know, I can't even show his face on a screen. So he can't come to a festival like this for many reasons, but for safety reasons. So during this whole...
So there is no actual way of getting him out of there and putting him back in, of course.
No, I mean, what I'm going to do, personally, is buy as many copies as I can afford and send it to the refugee camp, you know, just so the Rohingya can know that one of their great poets has published a book.
Oh,
That's something I'll be pleased to do. But yeah, he's going to be the first poet first contemporary poet at least, writing a poem of poems in Rohingya published in England and in the English language. It's never happened before. So the Rohingya language is endangered, like the Rohingya people, it's endangered. And so it feels really important for Roma Ruz to write in Rohingya as a way to try and preserve not his language just, but his culture. So the relationship between language and culture is so powerful for him. And you know, think about that at a time when his culture has tried to be destroyed and destroyed and destroyed. The preservation of a culture at a time of the destruction of a culture. So very powerful what he's doing. How are we getting on with the poem? Should we have a look at the first line or two? So, oh moon uncle, and I'm just going to ask you, Damir, because you're the chief here. You've had a look at this poem already.
Yeah, but I was doing it a very kind of freestyle,
Yeah.
thinking mostly about Bosnian Sevdalinka, that kind of feel.
Right.
You know, bittersweet, lonely, like the blues, like fado, like with that kind of air.
Yeah, interesting.
Noćni cvat jasmina. O mjeseče ujače, molim te počuj me, pristupi mi u bjelini. Za tebe pupoljci noćnog jasmina cvatu, vjetar će puhati nježno i pupoljci će padati, cijelo će dvorište mirisati.
And we're talking about firsts here. This is the first time that a Rohingya poet has been translated into Croatian. So, thank you to Damir.
Thank you.
I think that's a round of applause.
I'm clapping for the Rohingya poets.
I'm just gonna ask. Can we ask the Macedonian community just at the back? How would you translate that first line? You have to keep the O, right?
Yeah.
So then what happens?
Well, she got a good solution for this pretty much. Can I? It will be something like this. Očičko mesečko, meseček čičko, temom slušnima. Dojde doma na noseki belo. Za tebe kupkite na jasmino, što su ti navečer čeka. Vezmo keduva nežno, kupkite ke padna. Cijelio tvor, ki ga pomiri sa
And you're working fast there. You're working very fast. Thank you. Lady at the back, did you want to add something?
Ukrainian.
In Ukrainian.
Oh, in Ukrainian. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ali samo malo.
Again, maybe just the first few lines.
Dođi pročitaj da se čuje. Neko čita ispred kamere.
Yeah, come and join us.
So this is just a try that we have. O meseček čičko, temom slušnjima. Dojde do mene noseki belo. Za tebe kupkite na jasmino, što navečer cuti čekat. Vetrot ke duva nežno, kupkite ke padna. Cijeli odbor, ki bo pomirisan ne bo miris.
And you know, it's the first event of the festival, so we might as well have another first of the Ukrainian version. Thank you so much.
It's again a first try. Hello everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. It's really a first try, but I changed because the Ukrainian tradition is not moon uncle, but more moon brother. So I'll still think of it, but it's in rhythm, it will be something like that. Місяцю брате, почуй мене. Прийди до мене у білому, на тебе чекають пуп'янки жасмину, ночецвітного. Вітер повіє лагідно, пуп'янки зів'є, подвір'я пахощами його виставить. So that's how it roughly sounds in Ukrainian.
This is so cool. I think this talk workshop really works.
Well, you know, thanks everyone. That's, you know, things have to start somewhere often with translation, don't they? And it would be so amazing to go to Roma Ruz one day and say, your poems are translated into Ukrainian, Macedonian, Croatian. It would just move him tremendously because it means that people are listening to the Rohingya, not to him. He won't care for himself. he will be so pleased that the Rohingya voice has been heard. So thank you.
I think we also have to, I mean, this, isn't it the coolest thing? I mean, that now that the English language due to internet and everything has taken over, we have one solid conduit means of communication globally, you know. In the old times when I was trying to learn the trade of translation, translating through another language, a real language, was like a big no-no thing. You basically had to be an academic, you know, and do it straight. But a lot of those translations, I was reading Spanish poets, were so dry and so stiff and so unmusical and everything. And then later came some other translation through another language, you know, that sounded closer to in the spirit to the original than those done by academics. So I have some experience, I tell you, it's like just go and try and translate, especially if you write poetry, it's going to reflect back to you things that you weren't even aware that they're in you. So I think it's and here we have a living proof of that. But now to go back, let's jump a little bit to the stuff that you're currently working on. New direction. I read some of those relatively recent poems and I love them so much I translated a whole batch. And also, they're also kind of tied to the local atmosphere because the poem that I like very much, it's kind of even a little bit it's political actually. Americans talking about guns, I find it so cool, you know. And then I would like you if you can read it, and then I read the Croatian translation, and maybe we can go back to Rohingya then.
Yeah, sure.
Just to stir it up a little bit.
More poetry, is that right? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I spent some time in America. As you said, I lived in New York for a while. But also went back to America and was in Ithaca, teaching at Cornell for a while, which was great, but really interesting in the sense that it's a place of violence, Cornell. It's a beautiful campus, wonderful people that work there, but it's also one of the largest tracts of land that belong to a native population. And it belonged to the Gayacono. And there's only 8 speakers left of the Gayacono language. And I met some of them. And you know, hopefully we can continue to work together. But I would be working at Cornell. Then I'd go and walk around the land, and I'd think, what is this land? And I'd go to bars and listening to people, because about 5 miles away from Ithaca, it's actually quite a Republican area, and there was some crazy stuff that kind of went into this poem, actually. So
excuse me, were there any shootouts when you were there? Like anything happening? Because every now and then, you know, in America there is these shootings.
Yeah.
Like they became so frequent that it's like really worrying. You know? Even the statistics that you included in the poem are like wow.
Yeah, I mean, of course, people are shot all the time, and you know, there's the echoes of police brutality, which I was hearing at the time I was there. So yeah, it's really in the poem. Maybe I'll just read it.
Yeah, sure.
It does include some violence at the end, especially. Americans talking about guns. Take away the gun, he said, and you take away the history of this country. The gun of this country pointed at everyone, from neighbor to state, at the head of my son. Inside the gun of this country is another gun. Congress, filibuster, capital, murder. The gun of this country, someone else's country. Nations who called it by other names, mothers and gods. There's nothing more relaxing than a morning on the range. This AR-15 shoots straight as a dime. Every time, hold it, the gun covered with blood. I keep everything in this rifle cabinet loaded in case they come at night. I pay attention. I know what's out there. One day they're coming and I'll be ready. This rifle is my temple. It was my father's and his father's before, and his too, down to the years it took to settle this place. A bullet from that gun ripped a hole clean through your British flag. I pray to this gun. I talk to it as if talking to my ancestors and to you. My protector, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. 327 people shot every day in America, over a third shot and killed. Every day, 23 children and teens, 6 dead. Every day, as if you can't just act on the stats. My 10-year-old daughter could shoot a baby deer, he said. straight through the heart from 30 yards. She's that good. The figures omit injuries caused by civil insurrection.
Ja bih rado sad pročitao, I want to read the translation because I love the point so much. I wish I'd written it, it's so good. Tako da je volio pročitati hrvatski prijevod. Samo jedna napomena o fusnoti, filibustieri se spominju, to su bili gusari kad ima 18. 19. stoljeću, ali su u američkom političkom žargonu uvriježeno kao osobe koje u senatu drže beskrajne govore, ne bili se odluka koja je eminentna na neki način stopirala i makar u tom blebetanju zaboravila, to se rijetko dešava. Amerikanci pričaju na održanju. Oduzmi čovjeku pušku, rekao je, i oduzeo si mu povijest ove zemlje. Pušku ove zemlje je uperenu u svakoga, od susjeda do države, u glavu moga sina. U pušci ove zemlje je druga puška, ona kongresna, filibustijera, kapitala, ubojstva. Puška ove zemlje, nečije tuđe zemlje, nacija što zvale su drugim imenima, majkama i bogovima, ali ništa bolje ne relaksira od jutra provedenog u streljani. Ova AR-15 gađa da je to milina. Nikad ne omani, uzmi je u ruke, pušku umrljanu krvlju. Sve moje puške u ovoj stalaži su napunjene. U slučaju da dođu noću, pozoran sam, znam što je tamo vani. Onog dana kada dođu, bit ću spreman. Ova puška je moj hram, to je puška moga oca i njegova oca također i tako godinama, sve dok se nije malo primirilo ovo mjesto. Metak iz te puške ostavio je savršenu rupu na vašoj britanskoj zastavi, your British flag. Ja se molim ovoj pušci, pričam s njom kao sa svojim precima, kao s tobom, zaštitniče moj, Otac, Sin i Sveti Duh. 327 ljudi u Americi svakodnevno dobije metak. Više od trećine biva ustreljeno i mrtvo. Svakodnevno 23 djece i tineđera, od njih 6 je mrtvo. Svakodnevno moja 10-godišnja kći mogla bi upucati bebu jelena, kako kaže, s udaljenosti od 25 metara točno u srce. Toliko je dobra. Brojke ne uključuju ozljede prouzrokovane građanskim nevijedima. Hvala. Shall we go back to workshop and try to do a little bit more translation? Or?
Well, I don't know how much time we've got. Everyone's
Almost.
Maybe 15 minutes.
15?
15?
Yeah.
We can go for another workshop, or if you're tired of translating, I can read the translation.
Yeah, I think maybe there's one more poem by Romaruz, because I gave you quite a romantic poem from him. Maybe we try something with a different edge, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But
will you read the English version?
yeah, I can read it. Maybe just before that, I was just thinking of there's a great Australian poet, John Kinsella, and he says that every time he writes a poem, it is to resist the urge of state control and aggression. I'm paraphrasing what he says.
Mm-hmm.
But I think of like what is the responsibility for, for me, I can be in America, I got my British passport, I can go back home, I can write my poem, hopefully it's powerful, hopefully it connects, hopefully it makes a gesture against oppression and violence. Because I'm, like John Kinsella, I'm a pacifist activist,
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe in violence, but I'm also an activist, so that actually is quite a difficult position sometimes to be in. But poetry, as Shelley said, is that famous quote, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. But now they don't care much for our legislation, do they? So we're actually faced with a really interesting time in which art, they're trying to actually get rid of art. Let's face it, they would be happier if we didn't think, right? This is just my opinion, it doesn't have to be true, maybe you disagree.
But I agree with you completely. Yeah.
So it's...
I'm glad you opened this discussion a little bit, it's very
It's like, what is a poetics of violence? What is a poetics of responsibility?
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to think that I could talk to anyone and be friendly to anyone, but there are some people, possibly, who can't see people. It's a very strange thing, right? So they see people as spreadsheets, as quantities, as units that they can measure. They actually don't look at them as people. This is a very worrying moment. It's actually an ethical moment for us. It's a moral question. How do we continue to see people as people? And Hannah Arendt writes about this in The Banality of Evil. I'd recommend this text. And you know, she was talking about the Nazis, essentially. And I'm not here to compare anyone with the Nazis, no. But what I would say, as somebody, you know, I work in an institution, in a university. The arts in England, for universities, the government would be happier if the arts does not exist. Creative writing didn't exist. Even English literature, maybe, we'll see. So we're living in these times. And I guess what I'm asking here, just for everyone, and I ask this myself every day, is how do we respond to that? What is the response? And it's an open question.
That's actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you. You do actually believe in committed, in engaged literature, because in a way that's what you're doing. You know, maybe in a subtle way, because people, you know, now, I think these strange times that there's, like you said, there's either art for the sake of art, or no art at all. This is very, I think what you're talking about, the United Kingdom, this kind of attitude, it's so sad, because you think, I mean, the Beatles, the whole 60s revolution came out of British art schools. You know, when you look at the bands in the 60s, people who really changed, who introduced pop culture, you know, who put this world in technicolor, if you want, from black and white. In the mid-60s, they all, most of them, unlike, okay, maybe not Mick Jagger, he was in the London School of Economics,
well,
which to this day, that's
yeah.
reflected in his work, I would say. But McCartney, Lennon, all of those guys came from art schools, and now imagine, you know, shutting down art schools or you know, marginalizing them completely means like there's no need. I think it's a very, very dangerous incentive, and I think that the artists are pretty much facing the dilemma with, like what Antonio Gramsci, the great Italian Marxist, said. He said, you know, how I operate, he said something along the lines, it's the pessimism of mind, but the optimism of will.
Yeah.
We're going to do it, we're going to speak up, nevertheless.
Well, that's the thing, that's why they can't quite kill the arts off, because the arts involve hope and possibility and change. They don't want the change, maybe, but they can't kill hope. So that maybe some of you know this, but in ancient Greece, you know, they're up on the top of the hill at the Parthenon, and they actually were talking around with each other saying, shall we ban hope? I'm not joking. They actually said, let's ban the possibility of hope. But they didn't ask anyone outside the Parthenon, the one who's fixing the wheels, for, you know, so that the aristocracy can go around in their carriages. They didn't ask the women, the children, the poor. So that, you know, when they realized that it would be a revolution, then they thought maybe we have to give them hope, but just enough, maybe. And we're still stuck in this trap of, you know, they cannot destroy hope, but they want to keep us docile. In Croatian, docile?
Docile, dociranje.
Yeah. So that's why, and I love TV, but I can see why Sylvia Plath called it the death box. But you know, they rely on us just watching our screens all the time. Even our phones, they rely. Just have a look, you know, and then you don't have to worry about how many people are being killed every week. Of course, you know, these are interesting things. Like if you go back to the poem of Roma Ruz, though, you think, does all art have to be standing on your soapbox, shouting? No. Why can't Roma Ruz just write a poem about the jasmine?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. But he does, but the poem is really about loss. Oh, moon uncle, moon uncle. You know, so it's written from a refugee's perspective who has lost his family. You know. So you know, it's subtle, but it's still political. There's like a residue, at least, of activism there. You know, we're talking now, but maybe I'll wrap it up by reading one more of his poems.
Yeah, just before I finish, I just want a slight digression, but I think it's still on the topic. When I was putting together the European anthology, I got in contact with, because I found his book in London, a Russian poet, Kirill Medvedev, who actually gave up on like regular writing and became a rock singer and an activist. You know, he was involved with Pussy Riot and everything. And I communicated, you see, can I use some of your poems? I discovered them through English, you know, because even though the Russian anthology of Russian poetry was coming out right here, but mostly academic, very formalized poetry, Kirill said, Damir, I gave up on copyright. It's up for grabs. Whatever you want to do with it, thank you, you know. I hope he's not in prison at these times in Russia, because he's very, very outspoken. So let's go back to the topic of another exercise.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much more to talk about. You're just going to have to come to the rest of the festival.
Yeah, maybe we're gonna save the one after party. That we go around the table. You know?
I can talk to this great poet all day.
Thank you very much for that.
I mean, yeah, you did mention earlier about the engaged as well, which makes me think of Derrida, you know, poet engage, the
that kind of
being engaged. Yeah. But there are so many ways to engage in
We have time, maybe. No, we have time, maybe 10, 50, 20 minutes.
Okay.
Well, we can read this poem maybe and see if there's anything else. This was a hard poem to translate because at the end in Rohingya is a word ki. So you have to retain this word. Ki is what, or it can be what, or it can be whatever. So what, ki at the end of this poem by Romaruz, and it's called, and a very direct title, No, I don't have a home or the strength to speak. No, I don't have a home or the strength to speak. What do I have to say? What? When no one listens, who do I speak to? What would I say? What? I rolled the family census paper, heaped with tobacco, tapped the filter with a thumbnail, took a drag from the fasoli, it's like a thin cigarette, took a drag from the fasoloi, gossiped and did whatever. Selling drugs, we squandered our faith in the river. What will happen to the next generation? What? Friendly among strangers, bickering among brothers. What a life passed us by. What else will pass? What? Even with eyes, we were blind. Even with a mouth, we were silent. They washed our brains with illiteracy. What else is to be washed? What? Root cut, severed, forced to dry out in the sun. So much we have suffered. What else is there to suffer? What? No moon, no stars. What else is there? What? Is there any more light in my life? What can I see? What? No space underfoot. No strength to speak. What do I have to say? What? When no one listens, who do I speak to? What would I say? What?
Do we have anything? No, it's a long poem. I'll read the Croatian translation and we can do the whole thing close. Thank you very much. Ne, ja nemam doma niti snage za riječ. Fasoloj je cigareta ili mini cigara ispunjena duhanskim prahom, koja će se spominjati kasnije. Ne, ja nemam doma niti snage za riječ. A što je da kažem što? Kad nitko ne sluša, kome da se obratim? I što da kažem što? Zavio sam papir iz obiteljske zemljišne knjige, nasuo duhanom, noktom kažiprsta utukao filter, povukao dim, iz fasoloja trčao, trabunjao, činio koješta. Prodavajući drogu u Rijeci smo protratili vjeru. Što li će biti s narednim naraštajem? Što? Braća će se grožiti, prijateljski se obhoditi sa strancima. Kakav li smo život propustili i što li ćemo tek propustiti? Što? Pored zdravih očiju bili smo slijepi, pored zdravih ustiju njemi, nepismenošću su nam isprali mozak. Što se još ima isprati? Što? U korijenu sasječeni, prisiljeni da se sušimo na suncu, toliko smo propatili, što još preostaje? Što? Bez mjeseca, bez zvijezda, čega li još ima tamo? Čega? Ima li kakva svjetla u mojem životu? Što da vidim? Što? Bez zemlje pod nogama, bez snage za govor. Što da kažem? Što? Kome da se obratim kad niko ne sluša? Što da kažem? Što? Hvala.
Just one last thing from me. Romaruz only started writing poetry a few years ago. He'd barely written any poems when I met him in the camps. So, you know, poetry and poets sometimes are survivors. And a lot of poets I met in Myanmar, they are survivors. And this poem is like a poem that's there on the precipice of the past and the future. But, you know, I will speak to him tonight. I will speak to him and I will say, there was a room of Croatians and Macedonians and Ukrainians and, you know, we were all talking about your poetry.
Večeras će se čuti Jamesa pjesnikom, prema tome. I think we will be appropriate to dedicate this reading to Rohingya people and your friend the poet.
Well, that would be really great because the struggle goes on. So
We'll do something in our magazine just to support him. Maybe a feature or something through you, of course.
It seems like things in Croatia, they make, you know, these kind of choices. I don't want to generalize, but you just make things happen. And that's the great thing about poetry and translation and being somebody in the world where, you know, poetry is a happening. So, yeah, thanks so much for listening. See you.
Hvala vam puno na prisustvu. Ispričavam se što nismo išli sa hrvatskim puno jer bi onda ovo potrebalo 2 sata. Ovako, nadam se da smo pohvatili, a o pjesniku kojem je govorio Jane ćemo napraviti jedan temat u časopisu poezije. Hvala vam puno što ste bili s nama.
Hvala Jamesu, hvala Damiru. Još samo jedna informacija tehnička. Nažalost, naši gosti iz Italije su kazali svoj dolazak, tako da sutra u 12 sati ovdje neće biti programa koji je bio predviđen, ali sve ostalo uobičajeno, dakle i danas i sutra, to je zapravo jedino otkazivanje uz Aluta Karenko iz Ukrajine, ali imamo ovdje 4 gošće iz Ukrajine, tako da je sve ok. Sad ćemo se malo podružiti, a nakon toga idemo pješice prema Gornjem gradu na ručak u 14 sati.
Dobar dan, ovo je predručak onda.